Okay, welcome back again. This is part number 2. So to recap again, we say that Nelida, the change agent, her main role was to diffuse an innovation, and that is to encourage the housewives to boil water. Okay, so it is a 2-year boiling campaign in Los Molinos. Okay, keep in mind that 2 years. All these inputs, you would see them when you play a diffusion of simulation game later on. 200 families, etc. We discussed about this already. So, however, despite all of the facts, even having support like public talks, Nelida's campaign failed. Now, the question is, why did the campaign fail? Why is that? Now, before we answer to that question, we need to understand, the setup of the village. In Los Molinos, there were different sources of water. The first one is seasonal irrigation ditch, قناة الري موسمي. Okay, so but that one was okay. This is the first one, closed. The second one was a spring, but this one is very close to the villages. This one, the spring one, was a mile away. It's a little bit far, so they had to walk to go and get water there. And the third one was a public well. People disliked the taste of this water. Okay. Now all these 3 sources of water in the village, all of these sources were contaminated, all of them, and because of they were contaminated, that's why the public health campaign came to inform people about the danger using contaminated water. Because if you do not boil water, they may get infectious diseases. If on the other hand, if they boil water, it will reduce the likelihood of getting typhoid, for example. You see, now that's why the campaign came. Now Everett Rogers provided why the campaign failed, but he presented 3 examples, cases or scenarios of the characteristics of 3 housewives. Okay, and he said, for example, there was Mrs. A. She's a custom-oriented adapter, and then Mrs. B, she was a persuaded adapter, and Mrs. C was a rejecter. Now let's understand all of these 3 types of targeted audience. Mrs. A, here, this is everything is in the text, by the way. I'm just summarizing it here. Mrs. A is a custom-oriented adapter. Yes, she adapted, meaning that she started boiling water. Let's get some characteristics of Mrs. A. She's in her 40s. She has sinus infection, so she is suffering from some diseases. Okay, now you will later on understand why she adapted. She was known in the village as sickly. And she adapted, boils water every morning. Yes, she started boiling water, but she has no clue at all what germs are. What is the germ theory? الجراثيم, نظرية الجراثيم, etc. Okay. She was her motivation for boiling water was not that she understood that by boiling water would kill the germs, but she had a cultural belief, hot-cold belief system. So this was the main driving force for her, why she adapted, why she started boiling water, because she had a belief, hot-cold belief system, meaning that the boiled boiled water is equivalent to like you already this hot thing is only to be practiced by those who are ill and sick. They already had that, you see. However, people, the villagers, they disliked boiled water since childhood, and it's like not normal thing to drink hot water. Now, boiling was not for the purpose of removing the harmful bacteria, but to eliminate cold. So that was the main driving force for Mrs. A to adapt. Basically, she adapted. She boiled water, but for the wrong reason. Okay. What about Mrs. B? She is also a persuaded adapter. Now, why she was persuaded? Okay, Mrs. A, she adapted, but for the wrong reason. I mean, she didn't believe that they are germs. She didn't believe that they are small microbes. You see, but Mrs. B, she was adapted. She was persuaded. Why is that? So let's understand. Mrs. B, she came from high Indies. Okay, she was not from there originally. You can consider her as she was an outsider. And Miss B also, she was worried. I mean, she had predispositions, meaning that she had previous assumptions. Usually, whenever we adapt anything, whenever we make any, action or behavior, our behaviors actually are determined by what we already believe. Now, Mrs. B, she adapted because she had predispositions like previous beliefs, because she already worried about lowland diseases. You see, and that's why since she moved from high Andes into the village, Los Molinos village, which is in the lowland. So she was already concerned about the diseases. Okay, now Nelida convinced Mrs. B to boil water. Yes, she succeeded Miss Nelida succeeded in convincing Mrs. B to boil water. But the question is it because she used very effective communication strategies, or is it because that adaptation was also as a byfactor of previous beliefs of Mrs. B. This is what we are discussing, and we'll know later in this class. So she perceived. Now another thing that because Mrs. B, she was an outsider, she was not originally from the village. She looked at Mrs. Nelida. She perceived her as a friendly authority, not a dirt inspector. Unlike when Nelida visited other housewives, the locals who perceived her like, okay, she's a young lady, not from the same village, and she came to like an inspector, looking down at us, that we don't know how to be healthy and to be clean, etc. So for Mrs. B, she perceived Nelida as a friendly authority, you see. That is another factor why she adapted. She worried about uncertain threats, meaning that since she is an outsider, she has to be very friendly. She has to do whatever it takes for her to be accepted and included in that community. Otherwise, she would be excluded. Okay. The feeling of being accepted is one of the things that people are seeking for. A rejection, it's like another thing. She doesn't want to be rejected. Okay. So Mrs. B, she started installing latrines and took her child for checkup. She was labeled as an outsider. Community not important for reference group. So now she had a freedom of choice, meaning that not all cultural local norms she would obey to them. she doesn't care much because she's an outsider. She can, diverge from the known norms. That's why she deviated from the norms. And she's like, it's okay, I will adapt a new technology, a new innovation. I don't care about the norms because your cultural norms, after all, do not necessarily reflect my own culture and identity. Okay. And being an outsider with stumbling Spanish, she can deviate from local norms. Do you see what I mean? So basically, that is another factor why she adapted. Now let's discuss about Mrs. C, what her characteristics. Mrs. C, she's a rejecter, meaning that she did not adapt. She did not adapt the innovation. She did not boil water. And before we understand why she did not, let's get some of her characteristics. Now, Mrs. C, people who are like her are the majority who did not adapt. They were the majority of the housewives. Of course, they were not persuaded to boil water. They didn't understand what the germ theory was because they were surprised. They were like, how can microbes drown people? How can little tiny germs hurt a grown big person? They're like, are you really serious? Now keep in mind that this was in 1950s. So basically, people didn't understand what is the germ theory. So it is pretty much like COVID-19. Right now, we're saying, okay, there is a virus that impacts people, a hidden, invisible enemy. For them at that time, they couldn't comprehend that. So they are people who are like Mrs. C, like the rejectors who did not adapt. They were like, germs cannot be seen or felt. Guys, why don't you focus on bigger things, problems like poverty, hunger? You end up focusing on invisible enemy. So they couldn't comprehend the message. And now you'll be surprised, like, but this was in 1950s, No, the science was not advanced at that time, like our current time. But believe me, even today, 2020, we are discussing about innovations, public campaigns. We want people to adapt, yet they do not adapt. Very simple. Ask yourself. All of us, we know that do not text while driving. It is not healthy to text while driving, but yet people drive and text. I mean, we are in 2020. Why they don't do that? We know that, for example, okay, you need to eat vegetables, fruits, but yet we don't. We eat candies. We eat, a Bounty and Snickers. And you see what I mean? So basically, yeah, I know these are the case was very old, 1950s, but again, till today, they are healthy public campaigns. Still, people do not adapt. Go and check out WHO reports on the physical activity of people. Most people in the world do not exercise. So, think about these things and how you can create your own hashtag into diffusing a public campaign. Okay, so basically from Mrs. C, she thought that only the sick people should boil water. Healthy people don't have to. Okay, now, before I answer this question, why did the diffusion of water boiling fail? Let me stop here and we'll continue part number 3.